All right, good afternoon, guys, or good morning, good evening, whenever it is you are watching this video. School is back in, and so are the cops. I am doing this video specifically to outline the process of how a drinking and driving stop, arrest, etc. are conducted. So this is going to be a bit of a longer video, so bear with me here. Now, I'm doing this specifically because I get a lot of questions, particularly from college students, wondering, well, do I have to take the PBT? Do I have to take the breathalyzer at the station? You know, what's going to happen to this? What's going to happen to that? So I wanted to answer as many questions as I possibly could in a single video. Now, obviously enough, I'm not going to be able to answer all of them, but I'll do my best. So let's start. You're out on the out and about, having a good time. You make the stupid mistake of, or not mistake, but stupid decision of getting in your car and thinking you're okay to drive. First and foremost, don't do it. Okay, that's my biggest piece of advice. Don't do it. If you've been drinking, no matter how small, no matter how much, don't drive. There's Uber, there's Lyft, there's those electric scooters, there's, you know, walking, whatever the case may be, find a ride. I don't care. My biggest piece of advice is, number one, don't drink and drive. Okay? However, if you should find yourself in a situation where you do get behind the wheel after you've been drinking and you get pulled over, here's what's going to happen. Now, common reasons for getting pulled over. The number one most frequent reason why people get pulled over: no headlights. The number one most common reason why people get pulled over is that they don't put on their headlights. I understand. Modern day cars, usually you have it set on automatic, so guess what? It automatically turns on. However, some of the older cars, it doesn't automatically turn on, and you could wind up getting pulled over because you don't have any lights on. The second most common reason is swerving. Okay? Very clear indicator that there's a problem with the driving. Now, whether that's because you're on your cell phone texting, checking Facebook, whatever the reason is, swerving is the second most biggest reason why people get stopped. Last but not least, equipment failures, whether it's a tail light, brake light, headlight, whatever the case may be, or you're not wearing your seatbelt. Okay? These are some of the top three most common reasons why people get pulled over. Now, whether that's day, night, whatever the case may be, that is those are the top three. So be wary of those. What's going to happen? You get pulled over, and please pull over immediately. Don't go on a speeding wild goose chase, because trust me, it's not going to go well. Okay, that's just going to make things worse. Pull over safely to the right-hand side of the road. You'd think that that's common sense. No. Please pull over to the right-hand side. Even if you're in the left-hand lane, don't pull over into the left-hand side. Pull over into the right-hand lane, or as far to the right as you possibly can on the road, but do it safely. Do it slowly, do it safely. Okay? If it's at night, turn the overhead lights on. The last thing you want to do is leave the car dark and possibly arouse more suspicion. Turn the overhead lights on. Make sure that they're on. Keep your hands at 10 and 2 o'clock. Okay? Unseen hands cause a lot of unseen problems or unforeseen problems. 10 and 2. Okay? The officer is going to ask you for your driver's license and registration. That you must produce. You have to produce that. Okay? So, driver's license, registration. He's probably going to ask you for proof of insurance. Make sure that they're up to date. Make sure that you have all three of them with you. You can keep your registration and insurance in the glove compartment. That's where most people keep it, or in the armrest. Whatever the case may be, have it on you. And make sure that they're current. So if you haven't checked your insurance and you haven't checked your registration in a while, check them now. Make sure that your driver's license is up to date. Yeah, the last thing you want to do is have another criminal charge. Yes, it is a crime to drive without a license. Now, the officer's going to approach the window, knock on the window and say, "Excuse me, sir," or "Excuse me, ma'am," or "Excuse me, miss," whatever the case may be. Driver's license or registration. Do you know why I pulled you over? My advice: probably wouldn't engage in a lot of chit-chat with the officer. Okay? You do have to produce your driver's license and registration as well as your proof of insurance upon demand. So do that. Make sure that you do that. Do that politely. Either the officer is going to take that information and go back to his cruiser and run your driver's license to see if there's any outstanding warrants or see what your driving history is like, or the officer is going to ask you right then and there, "Have you had anything to drink?" Now, at this point, you don't need to engage in further conversation. You have identified yourself. You don't need to be rude. You can simply say to the officer, "Officer, thank you very much. I don't feel like discussing my evening plans with you, or my day plans, or my afternoon plans," whatever time of day it is. Obviously enough, the officer is probably going to persist. "Have you had anything to drink? How much have you had to drink?" You can just tell me. It's okay. I know that you've had something to drink. You don't have to answer that question. Why? Because now we're starting to get into an investigation, a drinking and driving investigation, which means he's looking for a reason to arrest you. Okay? Or she's looking for a reason to arrest you. If the officer suspects that you have had alcohol, or if you've been drinking, they will take you out of your motor vehicle and ask you to perform what is known as the field sobriety test, the SFSTs. In other words, the standard field sobriety tests. Now, we have seen a lot of YouTube videos about the different standard field sobriety tests. I can tell you, at least in Michigan, there are really only 3 recognized standard field sobriety tests. One is the walk and turn. Okay, so you place one foot in front of the other, and then you turn, you pivot on the ball of one of your feet. So 9 steps forward, 9 steps back. They will be looking to see whether or not you lose your balance. They will be looking to see whether or not you start before you were told to start. They are looking to see whether or not you do in fact take 9 steps. They are looking to see whether or not you pivot properly. Okay? Now what I mean is, by pivoting, you plant one foot and then you pivot around and then you walk 9 steps back. Lastly, they are going to see whether or not you actually put your heel to your toe. Heel to toe. Heel to toe. Okay? Those are some of the clues that they're going to be looking for. These are dexterity tests. They're also distraction tests. People who've been drinking or who have a significant amount of alcohol in their system usually will fail in terms of either keeping their balance, not hitting their toes with their heels, or failing to properly pivot. The other recognized field sobriety test is the one-leg stand. Now, everybody complains about this. Everybody says, "I couldn't even do that sober," and that may be the case. Okay? If you do have an injury, if you have a knee injury, if you have leg problems, if you have an ankle problem, or if you've broken your toe, whatever, you need to let the officer know this ahead of time. The one-leg stand is you stand. I mean, it literally is what it describes to be. You stand on one foot and you raise another foot a few inches off the ground, and you hold it there for 30 seconds. Now, the officer is going to ask you to count in your head up to 30 seconds. That's 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi. Not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. Okay? They are going to ask you to count in your head. They are looking to see, again, whether or not you follow instructions properly, whether or not you start beforehand, before you're told to do so, or whether or not you're able to maintain your balance. Again, people who have alcohol in their system are usually not going to be able to follow instructions properly. They're either going to start before or long after they're told to start. And lastly, of course, they're likely to lose their balance. So, those are some of the clues that they're looking for. The last recognized standard field sobriety test is something known as the horizontal gaze nystagmus. Horizontal, not vertical, okay? That's the follow my finger situation, okay? They're looking to see if your eyes start shaking at a 45-degree angle, okay? That's known as the nystagmus. Horizontal meaning from left to right, not vertical, okay? Vertical gaze nystagmus is not recognized by the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, okay? Those are the ones that's the agency that governs the administration of the standard field sobriety test. Lastly, the officer is going to ask you to submit to what is known as a PBT. P, which stands for preliminary, B, breath test. If you refuse the preliminary breath test, okay, if you refuse the preliminary breath test, which is the one at the scene where you're stopped and where you're likely going to get arrested, and let's just be honest here, that preliminary breath test carries with it a penalty of a civil infraction. Let me define what a civil infraction is. It is not a criminal infraction. In other words, it's not a crime to refuse that. It does not trigger the implied consent law. In other words, you will not lose your license if you refuse the preliminary breath test. I need to be really specific here, guys. The preliminary breath test is the one that happens at the scene. It's a handheld device. You blow into a bit of a tiny little straw, and it registers whatever your blood alcohol content is. The preliminary breath test is not admissible in court. That result is not the one that's admissible in court. Okay? So if you refuse the preliminary breath test, you will get a civil infraction. You're going to get a ticket for refusing the preliminary breath test. Okay? Forgive me, I can't quite remember exactly what the fine is. I think it's about $180, maybe $200. But at that point, assuming you blow over the legal limit, which in Michigan is 0.08, okay? I think it's 0.08 fairly ubiquitously throughout the United States and even Canada. But if you blow above a 0.08 or a 0.08 or more, be prepared. You're going to get arrested, okay? I need you guys to be prepared for that eventuality, because at that point, that's when so many clients start panicking and they open their mouths and say, well, I only had a couple of drinks. That opens the door, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, that opens the door for further questioning. Why? Because you have now waived your right to silence. Now, you can reaffirm it, okay? You can reaffirm it, but most people don't, okay? Guys, I'm not trying to get into a lot of legal theory here. I'm trying to give you practical realities of what a drinking and driving stop looks like. So, be mentally prepared that once you get pulled out of the car, you're probably not going home that night, okay? No matter what the officer says. Remember, the officers are allowed to lie to you. They are allowed to lie to you, and they will. They will lie to you to get you to answer questions. They will lie to you to get you to submit to a confession. So please, exercise your right to remain silent. Follow what they say, okay? I'm not advocating that. Follow what their orders are. But you don't have to answer the questions beyond providing them with identification. Now, that's not the end of it, guys, okay? That is not the end of it. I know this videos going on for forever and a lifetime, but that's not the end of what's going to happen. You're going to be arrested. Keep your mouth shut. Stop. Resist at all costs the urge to say, I just had a couple of drinks. Why? Because then the officer can start peppering you with questions. Well, what do you mean a couple of drinks? 2, 3, 6, 9, 12? You know, how many drinks is just a couple of drinks? And what were those drinks? Were they vodka? Were they vodka tonics, vodka Red Bull? Were they scotch, old fashions? You know, what are they? Beer, etc. Keep your mouth shut. You're going to get arrested. Understand that's probably going to happen the minute that you were pulled out of the car. Okay? I say that because all of these tests are giving the officers a reason to arrest you. Okay? If they weren't going to arrest you, they were going to let you go, and they weren't going to pull you out of the car. The minute they pull you out of the car, just consider the fact that you are going to be arrested. You're going to be arrested. You're going to be put in the back of the police cruiser. Now, again, this is another situation where the officers are going to give you a ton of opportunity to open your mouth and say something, and usually say something stupid. Don't do it. Don't give in. Don't take that opportunity to try and explain your way out of it. Think of it. You're already arrested. You don't need to give them any more information. So keep your mouth shut. Stop talking. I know. For any college kid, for any young man or woman, they're going to have 1,001 questions. That's why you talk to a guy like me. You don't talk to the officers. They're not there to answer your questions. They're there to arrest you. They're there to assist the prosecution in prosecuting you. They are not the ones who are going to answer your questions. Okay? And if they do, it's going to be vague. It's going to be frustratingly ambiguous. You're not going to get a straight answer. So please, stop talking. Stop asking them questions. They're not going to give you answers. You're going to be taken down to the station. Now, here's a critical difference, guys. Please pay very close attention to this. At the station, you are going to be asked to submit to another breathalyzer. This is where the implied consent law comes in. The implied consent law basically says that as a driver, you consent to a reasonable chemical demand by the police officer. Chemical test demand, which is either a blood draw or an evidential breath test. I'll talk about blood draws in a second here, okay? I want to talk about the evidential breath test, the EBT. Now, at the scene where you were pulled over, that's known as the preliminary breath test, okay? That was just used to see whether or not they have grounds to arrest you. The evidential breath test is literally called the evidential breath test because that is admitted into evidence. That is where they are going to sit you down. It's at the station. It's, in Michigan, most sheriff's departments or police departments use what is known as the breathalyzer 3000, okay? The breathalyzer, there's a longer straw and it's a fairly large machine. That is very scientifically calibrated, or at least it should be. Now, you have to submit to that test if you want to keep your license. You must submit to that test if you want to keep your license. If you don't, then you are going to lose your license. It's going to get suspended for a minimum of 12 months. Okay? Everybody follow me here? If you do not submit to the breath test at the station, you are going to lose your license for 12 months. Now, there are some exceptions. Again, that's for a later video, and I could go on for, an hour or two, maybe even 3, about all of the ins and outs of the evidential breath test. But suffice to say, in general, if you do not submit to the breathalyzer at the police station, you are going to lose your license for 12 months. Okay? Now, that evidential breath test is going to pump out a ticket. Okay? So it's about 6 to 9 inches long. Okay, that ticket will indicate what is known as a BAC, blood alcohol content. It's either going to be over 0.08 or under 0.08. There are going to be 2 readings, so you're going to ask to submit to it twice. Now, for all intents and purposes, you have to make a good faith effort into submitting to that breathalyzer. Otherwise, you're going to get your license suspended, and that's a whole world of chaos that, frankly, you would just as soon avoid. Alternatively, they may not take you to the station, they may take you to the hospital and ask you to submit to a blood draw. The same principle applies. That is part of the implied consent law. As a driver, you are implicitly consenting to the reasonable demand or the legal demand of an officer for your blood alcohol testing, which can consist of the evidential breath test, in other words, the breathalyzer at the station, or a blood draw by a qualified phlebotomist at the local hospital. They will ask you to consent to that blood draw. If you don't consent to that blood draw, the same thing happens. You will lose your license for up to 12 months. Or, a minimum of 12 months. Do not lose hope. There are ways to combat both of them, either the blood draw or the breath test, the evidential breath test specifically. But that's for me to do. All I'm doing is I'm outlining what you should be doing, or at least my advice, insofar as when you're arrested for drinking and driving. All this time, the entire time that you're asked to submit to these tests, your answers should be either yes or no. You don't need to elaborate. You don't need to give them your life story. You don't need to try and talk your way out of it. In fact, that is the worst thing that you can do, is try to talk your way out of it. Don't do that. Either yes or no. You're either going to submit to the test or you're not. If you don't submit to the test, remember, you're going to have your license suspended for at least a year. Okay? After that point, depending on what your blood draw is, or depending on what the results are, you'll be taken back to the station and lodged for the evening. Okay? At that point, the officer is going to ask you more questions. Now, there are basic things that you do have to answer. Your name, your date of birth, your address, your phone number. Some officers will take that occasion to again ask you, listen, look, Jim, John, Janice, whatever, Sarah, do you want to tell us again, look, I'm just giving you an opportunity to try and clear the air, or, I want to get your side of the story. It doesn't look like you're that drunk, but, how much did you actually have to drink tonight? You don't have to answer that question. In fact, don't. I'm just telling you flat out, don't answer that question. Officer, thank you very much. I don't want to discuss my evening with you. I've submitted to your tests. I've provided my basic information. Thank you. I would like to speak to my lawyer from here on out. That's all you got to say. Thank you. I want to speak to my lawyer from this point forward. Don't answer questions about how much you've had to drink. It's the kiss of death, guys. Once you're arrested, you're going to be lodged there until you're either arraigned or you bond out, or they release you on interim bail. Okay? It depends on the county, depends on the jail, depends on the circumstances of your case. But for all intents and purposes, that's in very broad strokes and in a very, very short amount of time how a drunk driving arrest will go, at least in Michigan. Couple of pointers. If you refuse the breathalyzer at the scene, okay, not in the station, but at the scene, you're going to get a civil infraction, but your license is not going to get suspended. If you refuse the blood draw, or you refuse the evidential breath test, which is the breathalyzer at the station, yes, you will lose your license for at least 12 months. When you were first stopped, if it is dark outside turn on the overhead light so the officer can see in. 10, keep your hands at 10 and 2. You do have to provide him with your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance upon demand. Make sure that they're up to date. Provide those to him. When he asks you how much have you had to drink, you don't need to answer that question. You can literally say, "Officer, thank you. I don't want to speak to you. I don't want to discuss my evening with you." That's it. You don't have to answer that question. 99% of people will feel the need to say, "Oh, we just had dinner and I had a couple of drinks." That's a problem. It's a huge problem, because then it gives him even more information or gives her even more information, depending on the gender of the officer, to arrest you. They're already looking to arrest you. Why would you need to give them more information? My advice, don't. I know this has been a longer video, a lot longer than I usually post, but school is now in session. Police are looking everywhere for drinking and driving. The number one piece of advice that I have is don't do it. Don't do it. Don't drink and drive. It's stupid. It's asinine. You have so many other alternatives. Don't do it. But if for whatever ungodly reason you decide to do that, don't incriminate yourself any more than you have to. Replay this video over and over, and if you have any other questions, give us a call. Basiga Law Firm, ask for me, Brendan Basiga, 517-708-7830. All right, thanks guys, enough preaching for today.